Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you decide, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. Today's book is another one of those stories that I picked up on Kindle Unlimited, and that would be called Cannibal Country. Now, Cannibal Country is a Kindle Unlimited read by author Logan Jacobs and published on August 7, 2023. Due to the fact that the book is barely a month old as of me reading this, actually, I wrote the script a while ago, so you'll have to forgive that, but due to the fact that this book is barely a couple months old, there isn't too much to talk about in terms of background or history, noting only that Logan Jacobs is a Kindle Unlimited author, in the sense that he seems to release a new book every month or so. So take that for better or worse. Now, being more of a minor TBR review, I don't really think I need to go into the cover of this book, though I will say that it's okay. I will admit that the book gave me false expectations because of the cover, but that was just more of a case of not knowing the author's previous works before I delved into this. I mean, the author is known for such works as Backyard Dungeon, or the Skolomance series, or the OPMC series. Yeah, just from these covers alone, you can kind of guess what kind of books this author generally writes. With this cover, I guess I was expecting something more along the lines of Dead Nation, admittedly. But before I dig too deep into the book, let's start with a quick synopsis. Now, the story of this book is fairly simple, all things considered. In this world, a disease known as V23 came out of nowhere and struck the population of the world, rendering most of the people unable to gain nutrients from meat sources. You know, sort of like a super amped up version of that one Lone Star tick disease. Now, since a vegan diet apparently doesn't exist in this world, this has led to mass starvation for 90% of the population. However, 10% of the population maintains luck as they seem to be immune to this virus. Our main character, Bram, yes, named after Bram Stoker, is one of those immune and ignoring all the pressure from the government and the pharmaceutical company to try and cure the disease. He mostly lives isolated on his ranch, so he kind of is away from the main big points of this issue, and he knows he's mostly immune because he's currently eating a big giant steak the moment the story starts. When a group of thugs from the pharmaceutical company show up to try and force him into a testing center, Bram learns through some really ham-fisted dialogue that the pharma company has learned that 90% can sustain themselves by eating the flesh of the 10%, and thus a cannibal country has been formed. And really, after that, the rest of the book is just your standard male power fantasy. Throughout 3 years later, Bram meets Cameron on the run from the big pharmaceutical company's goons, ends up helping her, joining an underground railroad for the so-named Tens, and becoming a harem master hero who somehow knows how to do everything better than everyone else. Honestly, I'm not lying when I say this book really is just too stupid to hate, though. There's a lot wrong with this book, but it's wrong in such a way that you just have to lean back and laugh to yourself as you read it. Honestly, I would lie and say that I went to this book with the best of intentions, but even 2 pages in, this book was throwing up red flags left and right. I actually thought that this book was going to be a hilarious anti-vaccination book that tries to imply vaccines cause cannibalism, considering our main character spouts some of the anti-vax rhetoric about mandated vaccinations, and our main bad guy is literally a big pharma company. But by the way, I'm not being general here. The bad guys are literally from a company called Pharma, with capital A at the end. It's really not subtle. Our enemy is literally Big Pharma. But the book more or less drops the anti-vax angle fairly quickly and goes into the standard male power fantasy. And that's clearly its only real goal, because everything else about this book does not work if you think about it for more than half a second. For example, the whole premise of 90% of the population turning on 10% of the population to eat them. Cannibalism becoming a national pastime is one of those things that has always been a hard sell for me personally. I just don't buy that our world would ever really go cannibal and try to normalize it. Now, this doesn't just stem from the fact that almost every culture in the world has major cultural taboos against cannibalism, but also that there are legitimate health issues that come with being cannibalistic. Humans just aren't made to eat other humans. We're not lean, so most of the caloric intake you get from human flesh would be fat, with an average human being worth about 80,000 calories in total. You're more susceptible to bloodborne diseases such as hepatitis or Ebola unless the meat is carefully tended to. But more importantly, many humans have things called prions in their muscles and organs. Prions are mutated proteins that have lost their shape and function and can infect other proteins. As more proteins turn into prion proteins, they cause diseases that put holes in the brain, basically turning it into Swiss cheese. If you eat meat that has prions in it, your risk for developing prion diseases raises much higher. The book itself tries to get around both these issues by claiming that the people are willing to deal with the massive cultural taboo because this disease, V23, makes infected anywhere from 2 to 5 times as strong as a non-infected human being, though you never really would know by reading it from the narrative. Bram repeatedly tackles, physically overpowers, and takes blows without so much as a bruise from goons that are supposedly strong enough to lift a truck with one hand. The book more or less refuses to acknowledge any of the health risks, and again, for some reason, the idea of a vegan diet literally never crosses the mind of anyone. And while the author tries to handwave a majority of the people in the world accepting this new cannibalistic norm by not actually knowing that they're cannibals and merely think Pharma A has created rations that help, that also falls flat by the narrative. When Logan Jacobs wants to evoke sympathy in infected, he'll bring this up. But somehow most of the characters know that cannibalism is the norm these days. Every Pharma A goon threatens to cook our heroes when they fight. Literally, it actually gets comical at a certain point because the amount of times the villains threaten to cook our characters into steak or cook them into ribs or barbecue them, it's so stupid. It's a secret that everyone apparently knows, thus meaning it's not a secret. And honestly, I was ready to come on here and jokingly complain about how the author seems to write Carmen with only one hand on his keyboard and clips of Sofia Virago in the background. Or joke about how all the character has to do is slightly smirk, and you have women ripping off their clothes and leaping at him to slide down the Bram fire pole. How you literally feel in certain scenes that the author is popping blood vessels as he does everything in his power to not use the words alpha and beta male, when he describes that the only other male characters that are part of the underground resistance are a group of nerdy betas. How I could also point out the absurdity of an APC somehow keeping up with a Toyota Corolla, which is traveling at highway speeds, or how Jacob has an absolutely juvenile sense of how to use curse words throughout his work. It's like they're just thrown out there. Like, he picked up a paradise and was like, ugh, okay, it'll be that part of the sentence, that part of the sentence, and that part of the sentence. But when our story is pretty much an ancient Native American curse has descended upon the population, so everyone decides that they need to eat other human beings, then, I really can't take this book seriously in the slightest. You might ask that if this book is an erotic male power fantasy, I should have noted that from the beginning. But, to be fair on that front, I'd hesitate to call this book an erotica. At least, no more so than any other adult book that throws in 1 or 2 adult spicy time scenes. This book has 2 scenes, and they're basically about as limp as you can get. Honestly, the only part of this book I would genuinely consider a critique as a serious point is the final chapter. See, the final chapter is about the only time I stopped laughing with the book and started just not liking the book. It made me feel wrong to enjoy it. You see, obviously the spoilers ahead, but after narrowly escaping Pharma A's goons' siege on the underground sort of headquarters, Bram and his ever-growing harem of female freedom fighters end up in an abandoned ski resort town populated entirely by children. Now, at first, things seem calm, but then Bram starts to notice a couple odd things here and there with the children, ultimately culminating in waking up in the middle of the night with someone clearly trying to get into his room. With that, Bram and Cameron sneak out and spy on the children, only to find out that this town is actually filled with basically children of the corn enthusiasts, as the children are not only infected, but genuinely hate and want to kill all adults. This ultimately forces Carmen and Ben to fight the children with their group to escape. And while the setting could have worked if Logan was suddenly indulging his horror inclinations, it's such a tonal whiplash that you stop having fun for a bit. Never mind the fact that when you step back, this book almost seems to be gleefully describing the scenes where our main characters are killing children, psychotic adult-hating children, but children nonetheless, who only 10 pages ago was still being shown as sweet and innocent as they played with the main character's lovable puppy. Not only is this tonal shift not earned, but Logan's does nothing to justify the scene, almost feeling like out of nowhere he just decided that these kids would be evil rather than the initial idea he had. They go from the innocent kids living through a traumatic time to full-blown sociopaths gleefully trying to kill our main characters. Even the tone itself shifts back to a dismal, what has the world become style of tone, when it was just coming off the triumphant win of the Pharma A siege that they just all survived. And then it just abruptly ends right here, as if the author decided that was it and he was done with this book. So, at the end. I guess in the end, I would probably give this book a 4 out of 10. For the most part, this book falls so firmly into the so bad it's good category, I don't think it's even really worth getting upset about. There are certainly complaints you can throw its way, such as the world building making no sense, the characters being super shallow, the story having the look of an erotica with only 2 pathetically written spicy scenes in it. Really, the only part of the book that I felt was just bad in general was the last chapter, though, which suffered from such an extreme tonal whiplash and ends the book so abruptly. But as it doesn't tie into the overall narrative of the book other than to hammer home even more how awful the world has become, it really doesn't ruin anything. Overall I'm pretty comfortable in my feelings on this book. So the question of whether or not it deserves Mount Doom is ultimately a no. You can mostly laugh at this book, if not necessarily with it, for most of the run, and so I don't recommend not reading this. I mean, if you want a good laugh, read it. Just don't try to take it seriously, and you're probably good at just skipping the last chapter. I don't think you'll gain anything from reading the last chapter. That's one of those ones I feel like could just be cut off, and you would lose nothing of value. But yeah, in the end, that's all I have to say. And just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones.